What does it mean to stand when all logic says to flee? What does it mean to fight not for victory, but for the idea of freedom itself? 2,500 years ago, on a narrow pass between mountain and sea, a few hundred men stood against the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. Their names have echoed through time: Spartans, Persians, Leonidas, Xerxes. Yet the truth of what happened at Thermopylae is far more gripping, far more human, than legend alone can capture. Picture the scene. The year is 480 BCE. The Persian Empire, vast and unstoppable, stretches from India to the Mediterranean. Its king, Xerxes, has sworn to crush Greece under his heel. Facing him are fractured city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, states too proud to bow, too divided to unite. And yet, somehow, they must stand together. For if Greece falls, the very idea of democracy and freedom may die before it can truly live. And so, into the jaws of this storm, steps King Leonidas of Sparta. With only 300 of his warriors, men raised from birth to know no fear, he marches to Thermopylae. To hold the line. To delay the tide. To buy time for Greece to rally. But what did it feel like in those final hours before the clash? To stand shoulder to shoulder, hearing the earth tremble under 1,000,000 Persian feet? To know you are hopelessly outnumbered, and yet to refuse to bend? This is not just the story of a battle. It is the story of defiance, of courage against certainty, of the moment when history itself held its breath. This is the last stand of the 300 Spartans. A king's oath: why Leonidas chose to stand. What kind of man chooses certain death over retreat? Why did King Leonidas, a ruler of Sparta, march knowingly into the jaws of annihilation? The tale begins long before Thermopylae. Sparta was not like other Greek cities. From the moment a Spartan boy was born, he was judged. If he was weak, he was abandoned. If he was strong, he was taken from his mother at age 7, thrust into the agoge, the brutal Spartan training system. There, boys learned to fight, to steal, to endure hunger and pain, and most of all, never to surrender. By adulthood, they were warriors in the purest sense. Leonidas himself was shaped by this unforgiving world. He was not even meant to be king. As the younger son of the royal Achaemenid line, he was raised more like an ordinary Spartan soldier than a monarch. Yet fate twisted. His elder brother died without heir, and Leonidas, the warrior, was crowned king. He knew the Spartan code by heart: return with your shield, or on it. So when Xerxes sent envoys demanding that Sparta and the rest of Greece offer earth and water as symbols of submission, Leonidas understood what was at stake. To yield was unthinkable. To fight was certain death. And yet, between slavery and sacrifice, Sparta had only one choice. As he assembled his men, Leonidas is said to have told them not that they were going to victory, but that they were going to their destiny. Each of the 300 he chose had sons, so that no Spartan bloodline would vanish entirely. This was no reckless gamble. This was a deliberate oath, to give their lives so Greece might live. But could 300 men truly delay an empire? The answer lay in geography, in a place called Thermopylae. The narrow gates. Why Thermopylae mattered. How do you stop an army of hundreds of thousands with only a few thousand men? Geography, strategy, and a pass so narrow that numbers meant nothing. Thermopylae, literally, the hot gates, was a natural choke point in central Greece. Mountains towered on one side, the Aegean Sea pressed against the other. At its narrowest, the pass was barely wide enough for a single carriage. For Xerxes' vast army, this meant that sheer numbers could not decide the battle. At Thermopylae, the Persians would be forced to fight few against few. Leonidas understood this perfectly. When the Greek council debated where to make a stand, many argued for open fields further south. But the Spartans knew open fields were suicide. The pass of Thermopylae was different. There, the famous Spartan phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, could turn the tide. Xerxes marched forward confident of swift victory. His army was immense, perhaps 2 million men, according to Herodotus, though modern historians suggest closer to 200,000. Even so, it was the greatest host the world had ever seen. The earth shook with their march. The sea boiled with their fleet. Yet when they reached Thermopylae, they found only a few thousand Greeks blocking the way. Imagine the scene. Xerxes' golden throne set upon a hill, looking down at the pass. Trumpets blaring. The great king waiting for the Greeks to flee at the sight of his endless legions. And yet, Leonidas and his men did not move. They stood calm, their red cloaks billowing, their spears planted firmly. The pass was narrow. The Spartans were resolute. And so, for the first time, Xerxes hesitated. Could his empire be checked by a strip of land barely 100 feet wide? The king would soon find out. But what happened when the Persians finally advanced? The clash of titans, the first Persian assault. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable wall of men? Xerxes believed his army could sweep the Greeks aside in hours. But the first clash at Thermopylae revealed something else entirely. The Persians attacked in waves. At dawn, the Medes and Scythians surged forward, their arrows blotting out the sky. Yet when they met the Spartan wall, their arrows clattered harmlessly against bronze shields. Spears thrust forward with precision, shields locked tight, and the Persians fell in heaps. The narrow pass meant they could not outflank the Greeks. Numbers meant nothing in that suffocating corridor of death. Xerxes, watching from his throne, was furious. He sent in his elite, the immortals. 10,000 men, the pride of Persia, each replaced upon death to maintain their sacred number. Surely they would break the Spartans. But the Spartans fought like machines. They rotated ranks, fresh warriors stepping forward, weary ones slipping back. Every thrust was measured, every shield an unyielding wall. The immortals pressed hard, yet found themselves dying like any other men. Their silk robes and wicker shields were no match for bronze and discipline. By nightfall, the pass was littered with Persian corpses. The Greeks had lost few. Leonidas' strategy had worked. The chokepoint, the phalanx, the discipline of Sparta. Thermopylae had become a slaughterhouse. And yet, this was only the beginning. Xerxes had limitless numbers, time, and gold. The Spartans had only resolve. As night fell, campfires burned across the Persian plain like a sea of stars. The 300 new dawn would bring more assaults, more blood. But what they did not know was that betrayal already lurked in the shadows. The unseen enemy, betrayal in the shadows. What is more dangerous in war, the strength of the enemy or the treachery within your own walls? For 2 days, Leonidas and his men had defied the impossible. The Persians hurled wave after wave against the pass of Thermopylae, yet the Spartans and their allies held firm. Xerxes could not break them. The immortals had failed. Even the sheer weight of Persian numbers had shattered against the narrow gates. For the first time, the great king tasted doubt. And then betrayal arrived. A local Greek named Ephialtes came before Xerxes. His motives were base, greed, resentment, the hope for Persian gold and favor. He revealed a terrible secret, a hidden mountain path, the Anapaea, winding through the hills behind Thermopylae. If the Persians could take this trail, they could outflank the Spartans, surrounding them from behind. Xerxes seized upon the treachery. He ordered his general Hydarnes to lead the immortals along the hidden path under cover of night. Guided by Ephialtes, the Persians slipped away from the campfires, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. While Leonidas and his warriors rested for the next day's struggle, doom was already moving through the mountains. At dawn, the Spartans sensed the change. Greek scouts had spotted movement on the ridges. A frantic message confirmed the unthinkable. The Persians were behind them. Here, Leonidas faced his greatest test. He could retreat. He could save his men. Yet he knew retreat would open Greece to invasion. If he held, he and his warriors would be trapped, encircled, doomed. The choice was no choice at all. Leonidas turned to his men. He told them they were free to leave. Some allies did. But the 300 Spartans stayed, as did 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. Together, they would stand to the last breath. And as the sun rose, Leonidas prepared for his final stand. But how does a man steel himself for certain death? The lions roar, Leonidas' last stand. What words can a king speak when he knows he will not live to see another sunset? Leonidas stood before his men that morning, the third day at Thermopylae. The Persians were already stirring, preparing for their final assault. The Spartans tightened their red cloaks, polished their bronze shields. They were not dressing for life, but for memory, for the way they would be remembered in death. Ancient accounts tell us Leonidas' words were few, but his presence was everything. He reminded his men that their sacrifice would not be forgotten, that every hour they held, every Persian they felled, bought time for Greece to unite, for freedom to survive. They were no longer fighting for themselves. They were fighting for an idea. The Persians advanced in fury, determined to end this defiance once and for all. And so began the last stand. The Spartans fought like lions, with broken spears, with swords, with bare hands and teeth when their weapons failed. They drove into the Persians again and again, refusing to yield an inch. Thespian stood beside them, choosing death rather than dishonor. Even the Thebans, though reluctant, were drawn into the maelstrom. Xerxes watched in disbelief as his endless army bled against a few hundred men. The Spartans cut down wave after wave, their phalanx breaking only when the Persians enveloped them from the rear. Still, Leonidas led from the front, striking fear into the enemy with every blow. But even kings are mortal. Amid the chaos, Leonidas fell. Some say pierced by arrows, others cut down in hand-to-hand combat. His death did not break the Spartans, it inflamed them. They fought all the harder, battling over his body, dragging it back so it would not be defiled. The end was inevitable. The Spartans were surrounded. Their spears shattered, their shields broken, yet they refused to surrender. Until the last man fell. Until the pass of Thermopylae ran red. And yet, even as the last Spartan died, their legacy had only just begun. But how could defeat become victory? From defeat to immortality, the legacy of the 300. How can a battle lost echo louder than a war won? How can the death of 300 men inspire nations for centuries? Thermopylae was, in the coldest sense, a defeat. Xerxes had broken through. His army marched onward, burning Athens to the ground. The Spartans and their allies lay dead in the dust. On paper, nothing had been gained. And yet, everything had changed. Because Thermopylae was never about victory. It was about time. By holding the pass for 3 days, Leonidas and his men gave Greece the precious hours it needed to rally. Themistocles and the Athenians prepared their fleet. The Peloponnesians fortified their lands. The defiance at Thermopylae showed all of Greece that resistance was possible, that the Persians could be held. And Xerxes? He had won, but at a cost. The sight of his immortals humiliated, the memory of his men crushed in waves by Spartans, lingered. The aura of Persian invincibility cracked. In the months that followed, Greece struck back. At the naval battle of Salamis, Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into narrow straits and destroyed it. A year later, at Plataea, the united Greek army shattered Xerxes' land forces. The invasion collapsed. Greece was saved. But Thermopylae remained the beacon. Poets sang of it. Monuments rose where the Spartans fell. Herodotus recorded their names. And inscribed upon the stone that still stands to this day are the words, "Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here obedient to their laws." Thermopylae became more than a battle. It became a symbol, a lesson in courage, that even against impossible odds, men can stand firm, that sometimes the greatest victory is not survival, but sacrifice. And yet, the story of the 300 did not end with their deaths. For centuries to come, kings and generals would invoke Thermopylae. It became the measure of courage itself. But who were these Spartans beyond the legend? What was the life that prepared them for such an end? Forged in fire, the Spartan way of life. What kind of society raises men who march knowingly to death without hesitation? To understand the 300, we must step inside Sparta itself, a city unlike any other in ancient Greece. While Athens celebrated philosophy, art, and democracy, Sparta was forged into a living weapon. Every law, every ritual, every custom had a single purpose: to create warriors who feared nothing. From the moment of birth, a Spartan child was judged. If an infant was weak, it was abandoned to the elements. Only the strong were allowed to live. At the age of 7, boys entered the agoge, a brutal system of training where pain was a teacher and cruelty a companion. Hunger was constant, punishments relentless. Boys were encouraged to steal food, but if caught, they were beaten, not for theft, but for failing. Through this crucible, boys became warriors. They learned to fight as one, shoulder to shoulder in the phalanx, where discipline mattered more than strength. They sang songs of war, marched barefoot on cold earth, endured without complaint. They were taught that honor mattered more than life. By adulthood, every Spartan man was a soldier. They lived in communal barracks until age 30, eating the same meager meals, drilling endlessly. Marriage came second to duty. And women? Far from being idle, Spartan women were raised to be strong, outspoken, and commanding. They told their husbands as they left for war, "Return with your shield, or on it." Leonidas and his 300 were not anomalies. They were the product of this relentless culture. Men conditioned from boyhood to embrace death as glory. To break the phalanx was to betray your brothers. To retreat was unthinkable. And so, when Leonidas chose Thermopylae, his men followed without question. They had been raised for that very moment, the beautiful death. But what did this beautiful death mean in the eyes of their enemies, the Persians? The empire of Xerxes, power without end. What kind of king believes he can command the world itself? To the Greeks, Xerxes was a figure of near-mythical grandeur. Son of Darius the Great, ruler of the vast Persian Empire, he commanded lands stretching from Egypt to India, from the steppes of Central Asia to the shores of the Aegean. No man had ever ruled so much. No army had ever marched so far. The invasion of Greece was meant to be his masterpiece. His father Darius had failed at Marathon, humiliated by a small Athenian force. Xerxes would not fail. He gathered an army so vast that ancient writers claimed it drank rivers dry. Ships filled the horizon in endless rows. The great king himself traveled with a golden throne, silk tents, eunuchs, concubines, and treasures beyond counting. But Xerxes' vision was not merely conquest, it was domination. The Persians demanded earth and water from every land they conquered, symbols of submission. In return, they allowed subject peoples to keep their customs, their gods, even their kings, so long as they bent the knee to Persia. Many saw this as generosity. To the Greeks, it was slavery. Thermopylae, therefore, was not just a clash of armies. It was a clash of worlds. One side believed in absolute kingship, where men bowed to the will of one man. The other side believed in freedom, messy, fragile, but priceless. The stand of the 300 was not simply about land. It was about ideas. Yet Xerxes was not a fool. He knew the Spartans were fierce. He watched, furious and astonished, as his elite immortals failed against them. But he had one weapon Sparta could not match: patience. He could lose 10,000 men today, 20,000 tomorrow. He had hundreds of thousands more. And when betrayal came through Ephialtes, Xerxes seized the chance with cold precision. The great king would break Thermopylae. He would see Leonidas' head on a stake. He would march into Athens triumphant. Or so he believed. But how could such a vast empire crumble before a handful of city-states? Fire and memory, how Greece struck back. How do you kill a giant? Not with strength alone, but with fire, cunning, and unyielding memory. After Thermopylae, Xerxes swept southward. Athens burned. Its temples collapsed under Persian torches, its people scattered. For a moment, it seemed the dream of Greece had ended. The empire of Persia stood unchallenged. And yet, Thermopylae had lit a fire. The Greeks did not collapse. They rallied. Themistocles, the cunning Athenian general, devised a plan as bold as Leonidas' sacrifice. He lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, where the massive Persian numbers became a curse. Greek triremes, swift and maneuverable, rammed and shattered the Persian ships. The sea turned into chaos. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne upon the shore, saw his navy destroyed before his eyes. Without naval support, his vast army could not be supplied. Xerxes retreated, leaving part of his forces behind. A year later, at Plataea, the Greeks delivered the killing blow. United at last, Spartans, Athenians, and their allies crushed the Persian army. The invasion ended. And yet, through all these victories, it was Thermopylae that remained etched deepest in memory. Because it showed what Greece stood for. Salamis and Plataea were triumphs, but Thermopylae was defiance. It was the reminder that courage can outlive defeat, that sacrifice can inspire nations. The Persians had expected Greece to collapse at the sight of their might. Instead, Leonidas' last stand had shown the Greeks what they could be when united. The fire lit at Thermopylae carried them through. Centuries later, when Alexander the Great marched east to conquer Persia, he stopped at Thermopylae. He honored the dead. He remembered the 300. For even kings who conquer empires must bow before the memory of sacrifice. But how did later generations, from Rome to our own time, carry this legacy forward? Echoes through time, Thermopylae's eternal legacy. Why does the story of Thermopylae still stir hearts, more than 2,000 years later? Because Thermopylae was never just about Greece and Persia. It was about something larger. It was about what it means to resist the impossible, to choose honor over survival, to believe that an idea can outlive death. After the dust settled, the world remembered the 300 not as victims, but as immortals. Their names were carved into stone, their sacrifice woven into the identity of Greece itself. Even centuries later, Roman generals would stand at Thermopylae and feel a shiver, knowing they walked upon ground sanctified by courage. Poets and philosophers used their story to teach the meaning of freedom. Freedom is not free, the message rang. It is bought by blood, by sacrifice, by the few willing to stand when others fall. Leonidas and his warriors had no illusions. They knew they could not stop Xerxes. But they also knew that by standing, they could show the world how men should live, and how they should die. And so, Thermopylae became a mirror for every age. In times of darkness, nations look back to it. In moments of crisis, leaders recall it. Even today, we remember those words inscribed on the stone. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. The 300 became more than Spartans. They became a symbol of defiance. A reminder that courage echoes louder than conquest. That an army can be broken, but a story, never. But perhaps the greatest legacy is this. Thermopylae proves that history is not written only by the victors. Sometimes, it is written by those who refuse to yield, even when victory is impossible. And so the last stand of the Spartans still whispers through time. End of story. Conclusion. Thermopylae was not the end of Greece, nor was it the end of Sparta. It was something far greater, the birth of a legend. Leonidas and his men did not live to see the Persian retreat, the triumph at Salamis, or the final victory at Plataea. But without them, those victories may never have come. Their stand gave Greece more than time. It gave them belief. The belief that tyranny could be resisted, that freedom was worth blood, that courage mattered even in the face of certain death. That belief carried through generations, shaping not only Greece but the very foundations of Western civilization. And so we return to the question we began with. What does it mean to stand when all logic says to flee? It means to carve your name into eternity. To fight not for survival but for an idea. The Battle of Thermopylae was, in the end, not about numbers, not about victory, but about meaning. The meaning of sacrifice. The meaning of freedom. The meaning of courage itself. And that is why, even now, more than 2,000 years later, the world still remembers the last stand of the 300 Spartans.